to the first Culture Lab Live. So this is our experiment in having a kind of a workshop or some sort of event at a national level that seems effective and interesting. So we decided to have a conversation, and we're going to have a conversation today on social impact. Now, before I introduce our conversationalists, I wanted to go to tell you a few things. We have some in the chat window. You can click on chat. I've put at the top a few technical points. If you need some technical assistance, Victoria is there to help you. So you can choose how to contact her. You can also call in if you would like. Let's see, another thing that I wanted to say is that we will, so I've already said the sort of the technical things. And then the other thing I wanted to share with everybody is that because we're having a conversation on social impact, it seemed only appropriate that we would actually do some social impact giving ourselves. So at the end of our conversation, we are going to vote, everyone who is here, on to whom we will give the proceeds of your registration fees. So we have three choices: Tipping Point, which is a Bay Area group, which is where the headquarters of Culture Lab are, and I am. Code for America is a national organization, and UNICEF is a global organization. So I just wanted to give everybody a heads up that we're going to be voting for who's going to get our money. Okay, so with that said, let's get started. So my name is Josh Levine. I am co-founder of Culture LabX, a national nonprofit, international nonprofit now, with labs across the country. And we are here to advance and advocate for company culture as a strategic advantage in business. You can find out more about Culture LabX at culturelabx.com, join the community, and find out about upcoming events. And that is kind of it for me. So I would like to say that today we're going to be talking about social impact and culture. And joining us, we have Dave Kim. He's the Program Officer of Financial Services for the Poor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And Denise Gershbein, who is the former head of the social impact practice at Frog Agency, and now works with clients to innovate beyond their quarterly profit cycles and create social impact in their business. So with that, I'll let you guys maybe we'll take a few minutes just to introduce yourselves, and then I've got a kickoff question for you.
Sure. Dave, you want to go first?
Sure, thanks.
Sure.
Hey guys, my name is Dave Kim, and as Josh said, I'm a program officer on the Financial Services for the Poor team here at the Gates Foundation. And on the team, I lead our product innovation work. And because it's relevant, before joining the Gates Foundation about 2.5, almost 3 years ago now, I used to be at an innovation design firm in New York called What If Innovation on their commercial intelligence. Before that, I did a couple of tours of duty as your management consultant. And my academic background, only because I think it might be relevant for this call, it's in anthropology. So that's me.
Hey, so I'm Denise. So I've recently become a solo independent consultant in the social impact space. I work with corporations, NGOs, educational institutions in not only consumer-oriented initiatives or educational initiatives, but also social impact initiatives. And as Josh mentioned, I was formerly at Frog Design up until about 3 or 4 months ago. Frog is a global product strategy and design consultancy. I was with them for 11 years, which means I come from the consulting world. So it's not only managing internal studio culture and teams, but doing that for our clients. And working with our clients on their initiatives, again, whether they're consumer-oriented, social impact-oriented, or just moving the needle in general on business at large. So my role was to sort of be the cultural leader, the visionary leader on creative work, and then also try to drive this notion of social impact through all of our business work.
Awesome, thanks you guys. So I think one of the most interesting parts of the conversation that we can have is really the There's this, Dave, you're coming from an organization that's like core mission is that of social impact.
Mm-hmm.
And Denise, you're actually coming kind of from an agency side where maybe a company might come to you and say, hey, how do we design social impact better? So there's sort of this, a little bit of a different model. And I think that's the lens, or part of the lens, that we're going to talk about moving forward. So let's start, I think, at the highest level and just say, how can a company strengthen the link between their program and their culture, right? How do those two things connect? Maybe, if an organization's trying to make those connect, how do they do it better? Or maybe what are some of the pitfalls in trying to do that? So maybe Denise, we'll start with you, and then we'll kind of see where this goes.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to answer that question, depending on where your company is at. And the first is, are you simply trying to build a culture within your company that is in tune with social issues at large? So are you trying to get your company to have volunteer days, or get involved in the local community, or even do composting internally with your own, trash or whatnot? That's one level. And then the other level is, are you a company that's trying to do that culturally internally, but also make it a thread through your business line? So through whatever you are doing, whatever your business is it designed to have social impact for your clients or whoever it is you're serving? So in my mind, that's the first question to ask yourself. I think from my point of view, coming from where I come from, Frog and a lot of clients that we worked with were really great about trying to make sure that this idea of social impact was part of the bottom line. So any program that we did, whether it was specifically social impact, like with UNICEF and trying to save children in Africa, which is a very obvious example, no matter what they were doing, that or working with Disney in the United States, anything that we did, we tried to have a social impact angle, which meant we were serving communities. We were thinking about long-term impact and results. We were thinking about how to give back. So all those were included in our business model.
So what I hear you saying is really the strengthening is thinking about, okay, how do we do something that's not just adding on? How do we do something that's actually changing the way that we think about like you said, our bottom line?
Yeah, the bottom line and who you are as a business or an organization in the marketplace. What are you doing to contribute to society with your services in a way,
Awesome. Let's see. I don't know where Dave went off to. Dave, are you still here? Let's see. Unmute. Is that you? You called in?
Hey. Yeah, sorry guys. I mean, you would have thought that at a place like where I work, technology would not be an issue, but sorry about
that. That's okay. All right, Dave. So we'll go.
That's awesome.
That is so funny. All right.
But guys, this is a human moment. These are moments we need to just sit in. And Denise, I hope your answer was awesome because I missed it. I'm sorry.
Yes, it was, Dave. So we essentially, the first kind of point here was really that, are we, asking yourself or your organization, is it about the bottom line, or is it just as something that you're sort of bolting on? And I don't know, maybe you can kind of add on to that.
Yeah, and again, apologies to everybody for missing the context of this question. But just reacting to it right now, this is something I've been wrestling with a lot, and especially now that I'm sitting here at the Gates Foundation, where our business is really all about social impact. I love the way Denise framed it in the sense that there are a number of different levels at which you can get involved, right? Whether it is through just like the way people behave. I think the behavior is actually super important with each other. But when it gets into the closer towards the actual business or the core operations of the organization, I think that's where it gets a little tricky. Because something that I keep on thinking about is, well, the whole thesis or the topic of this conversation is all about how do we create a rocking culture, right? How do we create that culture that is life-giving for people? And when I think about that, I wonder, is social impact actually, is it a must-have to get there, or is it a nice-to-have to get there? And I think, depending on which hat you wear or what type of organization you are, I think that the way you operationalize that, it has to be authentic to the DNA of your organization. I can imagine that social impact can absolutely be part and parcel of what you do, depending on what type of company you are. But if you are without naming names or pointing to industries, I can easily imagine a case where creating a social impact type of program just seems really silly, and people can see quite through that. I think that can backfire if it's not really authentic to who you are as an organization.
Right.
Denise, did you see, I mean, when you sort of, there's sort of this authenticity authentic to its culture. I mean, are you, in your experience with the folks that you have and continue to work with, is this something that you see as well? And does it work better when it's authentic? And I don't know if you have an example or a case study that you can share. I know some stuff is NDA, but
yeah,
not to put you on the spot.
That's all right. I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's this growing awareness of this idea of social impact. And I think, obviously the people here on this call care about it. I think it's becoming more widely known that it's not just a nice to have, that it's a need, right? I think we're starting to see that you can't really separate business from culture from the marketplace. And so people are trying to do better. I know that a lot of corporations, for example, try to do social impact. They'll have corporate social responsibility departments within their organization, which is a great first effort. But in my mind, it still separates this idea of social impact from the business. And again, I'm talking in terms of the business at large, and I know that this conversation is about internal culture, but for me, when we talk about authenticity, they're intimately tied together.
Mm-hmm.
So
100%.
Companies like Cisco have a really great CSR organization, and they're trying to find ways to bring it back into their core business model. They're not quite there yet, but I think they're making a great effort. So at Frog, we were able to work with them on some initiatives towards labor force development, where based on Cisco's core capabilities, they could go out and sort of create an educational platform that would train people to be ready to work on the IT platform. So it was good for Cisco, good for the people in the programs, good for the labor force in general in the US. So that's one really good example. I think another example is just broadening what we mean by social impact. So I think when people think of social impact, they think of the Gates Foundation and eradicating malaria or working somewhere else overseas. But I always try to talk about social impact as sort of these expanding rings of definition. So at the core is what I just mentioned, but as you go farther out, it might be working in the US with the Veterans Administration, or it might even be if you're working for a company that has a consumer-oriented product, are you thinking about long-term sustainability in terms of what will it do for the people who are manufacturing this product? What will it do for the people who are using this product? So there's a way to think about social impact that can be core to your business, even if you think you're a business that's not in that game. So it's sort of expanding this idea of like human-centered design that most of us are familiar with, and thinking about not only human-centered design, but maybe it's social impact-centered design. Like, how can you think about what you're putting in the marketplace and have that be authentic to your company, but do good in the world? And what I would say that I've learned the most from my partners at UNICEF Innovation that I started working with at Frog is that doing good is actually good business, that people are becoming more aware of what companies do and what they put out there and where they might shortchange these ideas of what I call sustainability. So consumers at large, I think, are becoming more savvy and more picky about this stuff. So I think people are open to this idea, which means businesses are more open to the idea of doing good is good business.
Denise, can I ask you to, I know we talked about you guys having some questions for each other and prevented you from talking to each other because we wanted to have an authentic conversation. So are there any questions that are particularly striking to you or that are sort of popping up for you that you might want to ask Dave about this kind of work?
Yeah, this is great. So this is where we'll go in real time. You just see my brain working.
Watch out. Yeah.
So Dave and I have met before because we actually met through Frog and the Gates Foundation, but we've not got to have in-depth conversations. So something I'm curious about with you, Dave, is that I described Frog and that world, not just Frog, but many other companies like Frog, or what I do now with consulting. We're in the business of serving clients from a corporate or consumer angle. You're coming from a foundation whose charter is to do good in the world. So I know what it was like in my world to try to advocate for social impact projects and have that trickle out into the culture. But I'm curious what the culture is like internally at Gates Foundation when you already have that mission at the highest level. Like, how does that impact you and teams on a daily basis and how you think and act and go about programs?
Yeah. So you're right. We don't actually have to advocate for social impact within the foundation, because that's kind of what we do. And it can manifest. It can manifest in a lot of different ways. But the first thing that really comes to mind is that our mission for creating a better tomorrow, really, that is the reason why we come into work. Like, that is a rallying cry. That is the focal point for the 1,400 people who work here at the Gates Foundation. And what is kind of mind-boggling, I actually have to take a step back and think about this quite often, is that on one floor, on my floor here on the sixth floor, you'll have maybe 30 or 40 people working on how do we promote financial health for the 2 billion people in the world today who are excluded from the formal financial sector. And if you just walk a little bit this way, you'll find people working on improving nutrition. On the floor below us, you'll find people working in water and sanitation, or people trying to create family planning best practices. So this rallying cry of, hey, we can create a better tomorrow, right? We are impatient optimists for this. That can be a really cool unifying thing, where it can bring people from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different levels of expertise towards one place. Something that I've also reflected on is that it's a bit of a pendulum, right? I think sometimes your superpower, if brought to an extreme, can also be your kryptonite type of thing. And I feel like if you're at a place like the Gates Foundation, it can easily be that all things fall aside in the name of mission, in the name of impact, right? And I think that can be, that can result in a pretty tough place to work at times, right? When you're constantly optimizing for social impact, it can really easily be that you're not also making decisions for the welfare of your team, or making sure that you have a balance and whole life, right? And what's been really cool is that in the time that I've been here, this is something that is really keeping the leadership team, our executive leadership team, up at night. And it's something that we're actively trying to go on a journey to, I don't know if it's solved for, because I don't know if you ever solve for something and you get a nice proof for it, but rather, how do we create this energy to constantly be better, right? Not only in doing good, but also in being good. So yeah, it's a bit of a rambling answer.
No, I love what you brought up about balance. So in both our situations, we're having to do a different kind of convincing. So in the consulting world, we're convincing clients that it's okay to do social impact and do good, that'll be okay for the business. In your instance, you're talking about, you've already got that mission statement, but you've got to convince people to maybe back off from that sometimes and take care of each other. I think that's a really important aspect in both situations, is that, you know, Josh, you were talking about social impact as this thread of authenticity internally and externally. And that does require this balance. Like, there's the business or the operational side of doing what you're doing, but there's also this aspect of needing to be able to sit back and reflect on that and take care of, is that working or not? And how are my people doing? How's our process doing? And how are we putting that out to the world at large? So that's something to account for if you're trying to build that into a new organization, or an organization that's not doing that, is, you know, first of all, knowing what is your company mission statement. Are you even in that authenticity pool yet? If you're going to try to move people in that direction, how are you going to get them on board with it? And then how are you going to take care of yourself and your teams as you're going through that advocacy phase?
Yeah. And Denise, so if I can flip it around and ask you a question.
Yeah.
So if clearly the Gates Foundation, like, social impact is you know, the core of what we do. And at Frog, I know that social impact is it's a pretty big practice area. And I know that in addition to that, you guys do some phenomenal work in a lot of different industries. So can you tell me about, how did you guys even get started with social impact at Frog? And what does that look like today?
That's a great question. So I have to give kudos to Robert Fabricant, who was at Frog a long time ago. You know him, yeah. Love Robert Fabricant. You guys online can all look him up and see what he's all about. He probably 5, 6, 7 years ago had a personal passion for this and was able to meet people at conferences and whatnot and start to form these little partnerships. So at the time he met the folks that had started up the UNICEF innovation arm. He also met some folks at the Nike Foundation. So he started building these little relationships and bringing in these small programs. And again, you know, Frog is a consultancy, and I'm speaking in terms of Frog, but this can be applied to any agency in the space. And again, I'm no longer with Frog, so I can't totally speak to what they're doing now. But so Robert at the time started building these small relationships. They weren't necessarily big paid projects as our normal consulting projects would be, but he found a way to show that if we did these kind of projects, we could build these very meaningful partnerships that would bring value to Frog as a business, right? Like through talking about social impact and sort of bringing a brand halo, if you will, but that we could also use that to apply that to other industries. Because what's important about a consulting firm is that you're able to span many different industries and talk about analogous ideas through compare and contrast. So he started building up these relationships, and then they got some traction. We were able to do bigger efforts, and people started to see like, oh, that's actually a really interesting area for us to be in. And then I'd say just in the last couple of years, we were even able to move the needle on that to really start getting paid for those projects. So that was a big turning point for us as well, because everyone wants to do social impact, but the question is, how do you pay for it? Because it's not a high paying field, as you know, but it's important. So we were able to start looking at things like, how do you build 3-way partnerships instead of a 1-to-1, which is common in the consulting industry? How do you create a relationship? For example, we did something with UNICEF plus ARM technology. So ARM is the world's largest chip maker. So we brought those two groups together, formed a 3-way partnership, and that allowed us to fund good work for the social impact space. So that was sort of a new innovation that we were trying as well. So just felt like, yeah.
Yeah, and then so what was the on the ground experience like for the designers and innovators at Frog? Like, were they all like kind of signing up and saying, hey, I want to do a social impact gig? Or did it take time for that to really gain prominence? Like, what is that like? Or what was that like?
Oh, from inside an agency like Frog, of course, everybody wants to work on that. I mean, I think anybody who's in the design or strategy business wants to do good things for the world, naturally. So when those projects started coming in, of course, everybody wanted to do them. And we were lucky, like we have a different, or they have a different model than, I know I'm not there anymore. I have to keep correcting myself. Had a slightly different model than IDEO, for example, who has a separate arm with IDEO.org. Whereas in Frog, we made it part of our core business. So anyone in any studio could work on social impact. We didn't sort of sequester it off into its own group. So for us, it was a matter of finding people who had the right skill set, whether it was design research or whatever was needed as far as industrial design or user experience design at the time, to staff those programs, which was great because then everyone gets involved and then everyone becomes an advocate. So that's another thing I'd say, if you're trying to build that culture, is how can you bring on advocates?
But Denise, not everybody is, working in agencies, right? So let's translate that, right? So maybe we can sort of think, okay, what is, if someone is working at an organization, maybe the first attempt at this is there's some sort of social impact initiative going on of some sort, right? I mean, is it, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is more of like just a general kind of business question, but like, how have you seen, and I guess no is a fair answer as well, have you seen organizations say, okay, we're doing this thing, why don't you spend some time on it? Like, who would like to volunteer to be part of this? Is that something that you've seen happen?
I mean, I think that's I wouldn't say fairly popular, but known way of doing things. I mean, everyone knows about the old Google 80-20 rule where people had 20% of their time to work on whatever they want. I think that doesn't always work as a business model, especially for startups.
Exactly.
So I've seen it come out in ways like sometimes companies will give you as a benefit, you get a day a year or 2 days a year when you get to go volunteer in the community. Or some companies will try to take whatever their product is and offer that as a service to organizations in need. So for example, Tipping Point is one of the groups today that we're having people vote on to donate to. And so Tipping Point could be in need of all kinds of services, whether it's, they need refreshments for an event they're putting on, or whether they need event organizing, or whether they need people that work in communities with education. So what I'm saying is, your company could be finding a way to donate its or give its services to these people who are doing social impact. So you can do social impact at a level or 2 or 3 removed, and it's still social impact. So that's another way to get involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does that sort of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And before the Gates Foundation, I worked at the innovation firm in New York, What If Innovation. So we did a couple of social impact gigs, but as I think through how we did it and what that resulted in, a lot of it some of the ones that I loved were the ones because we went kind of rogue, right? So these were not necessarily the ones that are properly sanctioned, has a stage gate approval process. Rather, Denise and I have been really lucky in working with places with a lot of good friends, right? That's kind of the places we've worked at. And we got our friends together who are kind of like-minded, who want to do these really cool things. And we just kind of made it happen on our own time. And when the leadership team saw that actually happen, they easily could have said, guys, this is not core and part and parcel of what we do. Focus. Mm-hmm. But rather, they saw us get super energized by doing these types of things. Like, the example is, we helped our friend Hannah really set up this amazing tech incubator in Brooklyn that's now part of the Robin Hood Foundation, which is super cool. It's all about creating tech solutions for low-income Americans, right? But we were there to help teach them insights, or help the ideation process, and we just did it because we wanted to do it. And I think this going rogue and having the sense of agency is super important to create a sense of vibrancy and energy. And it can be when you wear a social impact hat, and I don't know if I may be going rogue here, Josh, for the topic of this conversation. It could easily be like my friend John Henry, who said, guys, we need to go set up our kickball league. And he went and did that. And again, that for us was his way of creating energy in a really authentic way. And that got people really excited to come to work every day and stick around for happy hours as well. That was another example, I think, of just not always going down the official path.
Oh my gosh, I want to underline that before we go on. That is so true, and I talk about that so often. Doing anything new is entrepreneurial, especially doing something social impact oriented is so entrepreneurial. That's what I always tell people. And you, like you said, Dave, you can't wait for management to come down and say, here's your beautiful, shiny budget for the year. We're giving you all these hours. It does not work that way. It is led by people who are passionate and excited, and they find the way to do the workarounds and get people on board. And then it bubbles up, and the business will start to see that's something of value that we should help promote. But I love what you said, Dave, and I think that's totally right.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, one of the things that we talk about in CLxLIVE is this idea of sort of the intrinsic or authentic rituals that kind of pop up in the businesses, which is what I think you're talking about, right? As opposed to here's the thing that we need to be doing. You actually, kind of go and do these things, and then it's the manager's job to identify those things and then say, let me make space for this to happen. Right? Because it's organically, it's coming from those people. And I think it's even better than actually saying, here's your budget, go do this thing.
Yeah.
Well, but don't get me wrong, Josh. If someone gave me a budget, I'd be very happy too, right? so that's not the takeaway from this call. Please give us a budget. We could do so much more with a budget.
Exactly, right.
Yeah. So Denise, earlier in this call, you mentioned something really interesting about how the different degrees of how people could get involved in social impact, right? Everything from everyday set of behaviors, like whether it's composting or carpooling. These are all great things. You can expand out, you can think through more CSR type of activities, and you can even expand out even more and think through embedding social impact into the core business, right?
Yeah.
And then he said something really interesting about the what and the how. And for me, that brought up, like, living now here in Seattle, Pacific Northwest, I think of companies like Patagonia that are just amazing at embedding this in towards the how.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious, from an agency perspective, did people really lead with the what? It's like, hey, help us bring social impact into what we do? Or did you find more people come and say, hey, help us build in social impact into how we do the things that we do today?
Wow, so I could answer that from the internal culture perspective or the external client perspective. Which one are you asking about?
Oh, that's a good point. I should be clear. Let's go with internal first. I think that's much more interesting.
I think internally, I mean, one of the things I loved about Frog, and I'm sure similar at IDEO and other orgs, is that, and even Gates, it's an organization of really smart, really passionate people. So I always said it was the closest thing to being in grad school without being in grad school. People that are just like, they have their theses, they have their passions that they're working on. So they're really highly motivated anyway to do something meaningful. I think on the flip side, passion without know-how or without business savvy, like, there's something you need to teach those folks to get them to do it. So a lot of times internally, I'd have lots of people who wanted to work on these programs, but they didn't know, like, they'd bring program ideas to me and I'd have to say, well, that won't quite work because it doesn't yet fit with the business model or what the company is trying to focus on theme-wise this year. But if you tweak it in this way and focus it slightly differently, we might be able to get it through. So it was a matter of, like, harnessing all that energy that already existed, but also sort of redirecting, shaping, teaching people how to advocate for themselves and shape the right programs so that we could do it. And I'm not sure if I went off track from your question. What was your question exactly again?
Yeah, so I guess I was really curious about, I love this dichotomy between the what and the how. It's like, hey, what is, we are doing social impact type of projects. And the how is, hey, we're doing our own set of projects, but somehow we're embedding social impact into the way we do it. So whether it's like Patagonia, really thinking through the environment and sustainability aspect. I was just kind of curious if you saw, I guess, more of a market intelligence or market demand type of question, if people came more with the what or the how to you guys.
Yeah. I wouldn't say they came to us with the how, because often clients didn't come to Frog with that question. Our clients didn't know what they needed, and that's why they came to us, right?
That's fair.
We could frame the problems. I think, a lot of our clients knew they needed to start thinking in longer term cycles rather than, quarterly profits. They needed to be thinking about what's their business in 20 years. And once you start thinking about that, you start thinking about the idea of sustainability in its largest sense, not sustainability as like, let's be green and recycle, but rather, what's the market going to be? What's the education force going to be? What are the distribution channels going to be? And how can we get all those things to work together in a positive way for global health in 20 years? That's a big, nasty ecosystem you have to think about. So, they would often come to us and say, like, for example, we worked with P&G, one of their groups that was thinking, P&G is like, you think of them as like the soap company, right? Like, that's the least sustainable.
Procter & Gamble. Is that
yes.
Procter & Gamble? Okay.
Yeah. But they were really smart in that they created a new business unit that was chartered to look at their 20-year business plan. What should they be in 20 years? Because if it wasn't going to be soap, like, what was it going to be? And how could they be, helping all these parts of the ecosystem that I just managed? So for them and other clients, it's like, they know they need to get somewhere. They wouldn't necessarily call it social impact or sustainability. And our job was to help them frame that. So in a sense, you might not even talk about social impact. You might just have it as your North Star, and that you're going to subtly bring it in through everything that you do. I think often if we get behind the flag of social impact, it becomes separate or other. And again, you want to think about how to make it this authentic, natural part of what you do. So thinking in terms of sustainability for clients, or culture, or internally, or what is the service that you're offering? How can it benefit the most people? Are ways of doing social impact without putting it under that separate flag.
Yeah, and I love that. So the social impact flag, I guess we hoisted quite proudly here. But it sounds like it can also have a stigma to it in some places, right? What is that? Why is there such a stigma for that?
That's so great that you asked that, because I was about to ask you a similar question, and I'll bring it back to you in a second.
Sure.
I think it gets a stigma because, it's soft. Oh, it's reflective. Oh, you just want to help people. That's not the real world. That's not how you get things done in the real world. There's no like traction for that. So I think people don't believe it can be a real thing. People think like the market just works the way that the market works, and the world just works the way that it works. And there's nothing we can do about it. We have to make money, but I don't buy that. Right. I was going to ask you, Dave, sitting where you sit, and you guys all have like, you know, drunk the Kool-Aid for better. Like you guys genuinely believe in what you do and you're really making a difference in the world. So how is it for you when you talk to people externally that aren't yet thinking this way? How is it like, why the hell aren't you doing social impact? Or what, you know, don't you see how important this is? Like, how do you guys bridge that gap in capabilities or knowledge or advocacy?
Yeah, well, you know, I don't know if we figured it out perfectly yet. Right, but I think we have a couple of things we're trying to do, and we'll see what the feedback is like. But for us to really change the way the world works today for the better, whether it's eradicating diseases or creating health systems, or really making sure that people have the financial tools to have positive financial lives, we can't do this always with the banner of social impact. And really, we can't do this just with the banner of nonprofit organizations.
Uh-oh, we just lost Dave again.
Just because there's something fundamentally broken in the system, right? And for us to, sorry.
That's okay. Can you back up?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, back up 10 seconds.
Okay. Guys, those 10 seconds were really good. But I'll try to think through it again. So what I was trying to say is that for us to really achieve the vision that we've all signed up for, at least from the Gates Foundation side, we can't do this alone, right? We need to do this with all the different folks within the ecosystem. That means the government, that means the private sector, that means the nonprofit sectors. And we know that serving the poor or doing good is not always the thing that will get people out of bed, right? That's not the thing that will motivate people to do things. Because people have their own set of incentives, people are rewarded in their own ways, and we just need to be aware of these types of dynamics as we try to do the work that we're trying to do. So we've tried reframing the opportunity in some cases, right? So in the financial inclusion world, what you'll often hear is that, hey, you're not trying to necessarily serve the poor, Mr. Banker or business banker. You're trying to now serve the next emerging customer segment. Right, so it's like, how do we? So that's one way to do it. Another way we tried doing it is that I guess what we had talked about earlier is a little bit of the brand halo effect, right? It's by doing this, it will help your core business as well. But I'll be honest with you guys. I mean, it isn't always an easy sell. It isn't always a slam dunk. So I think we're constantly trying to figure out different angles in to this, but I do know that the eventual solution is that we will need everybody on board to get this work done. We can't do this just with the government. We can't do this just with the nonprofit sector.
So I have a kind of to that point of like getting people on board. So Jocelyn from San Francisco works, she's listening in, and she works for a small startup, and they have these events throughout the year, right? But the problem is that people only think about it during those like events of service, and she doesn't just want to be one of those organizations that they bolt on the social impact, like, yay, we're going to go, you know, hand out water for a 5K or something, whatever it is. And so the question, hey, you know, right, smaller things, but her question is like, what are some tips on how to incorporate social impact into the day-to-day, like we talked about, but on a smaller scale, right? Both of you are talking about huge, really big organizations that you're working for, Procter & Gamble, Cisco, those types of things, UNICEF. But, you know, if for someone at a startup, if we want to start to integrate it, you know, how do we start to make engineers care about homelessness is one example that she's putting out there.
Mm-hmm. I'll jump in with that because I have an answer that I gave in a different context that I think is related here. So I was giving a talk to some Carnegie Mellon students who are in the innovation field, trying to think about what they're going to do with their careers and how do I make sense of it. And I was telling them, I don't think I planned where I was going to end up now doing social impact. But what I did do along the way is I followed what was interesting to me. I followed the questions that were interesting to me, and I followed the issues that were interesting. And over time, if you think about that in terms of like, I had a thesis, let's say, or I had a question that I was always trying to answer. Over the course of time, as I had more experience with each of those things, it enabled me to sort of build a platform for myself. Looking back, I could make sense of the things that I learned, how they tied together, and how I could talk about them to people. So I would say, is it Jocelyn? Is that who asked the question? Jocelyn. Yeah. I would think about like, what is your question and what are you trying to do? And even if you start in small ways, you'll learn from your success as well as failure. And what you'll do is start to build up how you tell that story or how you talk about it. So it might be that, you know, you're trying to get your manager to agree to give everyone the day off to go do something. And what you learn from that is, how did you manage that? How did you get stakeholder alignment? How did that experience work or not for the other employees? What did that particular initiative do for maybe the brand halo of your company? So you're going to get small bits of information that you then use for the next effort. So the next time you try to do it, you say, well, you know, our company XYZ, we did this thing and it mattered for our consumers because we learned, you know, these things about doing social impact. How about if we do this time? So you start to build up a portfolio of experience and knowledge that you just keep advocating for yourself. So it's not going to happen immediately. Again, we talked about like, you're not going to get the nice shiny budget right out of the gate, but if you start to be the person who can build up knowledge, experience, and questions and make sense of that for people, they're more likely to want to follow along with you. That make any sense?
Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, so I'd love to like just build on what Denise said. I would say one of the things that we can probably do tomorrow or even today is, how do we make it real, right? I mean, I think that's just like a good design principle to have. It's if it's really abstract, it's really easy to kind of check out from it. So I would try to figure out ways, how do we make this real, tangible, and human as fast as possible, right? So that there is that sense of a human-to-human connection, or a recognition of, hey, there's something here, right? It's one thing to say, this is the full program that we will be doing. And I know for me, because I have the foundation probably won't like this too much, but a healthy disdain for authority, because I just don't like when people tell me what to do. So I probably wouldn't like it when someone said, hey, Dave, here's a social impact program, go execute on this, right? I always like having a hand in co-creating and building together what could be. So I think that's a really cool invitation to your engineers, to other folks within your startup, to say, hey, there's something really interesting here. Either, A, how can we learn more about it, make it real, right? Or B, it's like, once we've done that, what could we do about it? What should we do about it? Those are two, I think, really interesting questions. But the third thing that you might want to keep in mind is, how do you know whether you're doing this right? What does it feel like when you have this this culture of social impact, or a culture where people are much more engaged in things beyond just what you're the core mission of shipping something, producing something, or editing something? And I think Tina Seelig from Stanford said something amazing a couple of years ago, where she said, a company culture is kind of like the background music of a movie. You instinctively know how to feel at times, right? Or if you want to go old school and go to Clifford Geertz from Anthropology, you know, he said, look, man is stuck in a web of symbols like he himself is sun. So there's something really interesting about how do you make it real? How do you create these artifacts? And how do you create rituals around it? And it doesn't have to be really big. But I do think these little things could really, as Denise said, build up to something pretty powerful.
Great.
Yeah.
I like that.
I want to add on that a little bit if we've got time, if that's okay. And going back to what you said earlier, Dave, about this is a big, complex ecosystem with a lot of different players. So any one of you out there who are trying to bring this to your particular company or organization, don't think you're going to go out there and solve the whole problem right away. Don't think you're going to tackle homelessness and you have to have the answer. Think about it as a big nest of possibilities, and your job is to find the part of that ecosystem that you can have an effect on, and know that you have a lot of partners that are trying to do the same thing, and it takes all of us to do it.
Oh, and sorry, Josh, because this is super, just one more thing. I remember, oh man, like almost like a decade ago, I well as a management consultant, I also did a side gig with this great nonprofit organization called the Taproot Foundation, where they get professionals and they train them to become nonprofit consultants, essentially, and they match them with different organizations, which I thought was a really cool, lightweight way of getting people involved in this, right? So I don't know if Taproot Foundation still does things like this. Sorry, that's 10 years old information.
No, I think Taproot's still around, yeah.
But the principle there is that it doesn't necessarily have to be within your 9 to 5, within that hat you wear. Because we constantly wear different hats. We constantly negotiate our identities, right? There could be really lightweight ways to get involved.
So Liza from CLxLIVE in New York is asking, I think, a really kind of culture nerd question, which is, and I mean that in the best of possible lights. So
I'm a culture nerd.
Yeah, no, I know, right, totally, in good company. So she's talking about the nonprofit world and how nonprofits are often engaged or measured basically on their like operating expenses versus operating and program expenses, and it's really about running a lean business. But then that and I know this from my work with a lot of nonprofits, that it affects, that sort of lean approach really affects the internal culture, right? So is there a way, like, do either of you, have you seen a successful argument for having funding actually go to creating a more robust organization itself, right? How do you get that? How do you actually create? We know in the business world, quote unquote, the business world, that a great culture is going to really improve the bottom line. It's going to create a better organization. But really, right now, in a lot of the nonprofits and philanthropic organizations, that money goes right through because that's what everybody wants to see. It goes out the door. So is that what you've seen, and does that change? How can we make that change?
Well, from what I've seen, and Dave, I'm sure you have a lot more insight on this, but from what I've seen in the social impact space, like working with Tipping Point, for example, the discussion right now is even, can you turn any of that funding away from operating expenses to R&D? Like, let alone culture, but can you even turn it into, like, let's have a riskier outlook, let's be innovative. That's a very different model for funding than just putting everything to operations and output and measurable impact. So I hadn't even thought about it in terms of, like, can you turn that funding to internal culture? So my response before you said that was going to be, do whatever you can on a shoestring or no budget to have your team bond, whether it's like on a daily basis, you walk 5 blocks and go to the museum together, or you take a day to eat lunch in the park together. Whatever you can do to create bonding experiences with your team, I think is really important, even if you have no cash to input in that. But I think it's a great question, and I don't think no one that I know of is putting the funds to that space yet. Dave, what have you seen?
Yeah, interesting. I love this question because I also hate this question.
Yeah.
Because I think this metric is such a bullshit metric. And sorry, that's Dave Kim's hat, not the Gates Foundation's hat. That should have been a disclaimer from the get-go, by the way.
That's right.
Gosh. Anyway, there's a great TED Talk about this, first off. I think Dan had a great conversation about this. And even with that, this is, again, such a short-sighted argument.
Oh, I think we lost Dave.
Between being efficient versus being effective. Right. And
hey, Dave, back up to where you said
now?
This is an inefficient argument. That's where you cut out.
Okay, that also was golden. But what I was trying to say is that that hyper focus on this is, I think, short-sighted, because it's such a question about efficiency versus being effective, right? And if you think about the change that nonprofit organizations are trying to create, man, that is super, super hard. I don't necessarily think it always has to be the leanest organization, but I do think it has to be the most effective organization. Yeah. And for us, putting back on the Gates Foundation's hat, when we've made investments and grants on a number of different organizations, sometimes it is, yes, designed just for a specific program or intervention. But we've also done investments or grants for general operating support, right? So this is just more for building up capacity of an organization to do something. So there are organizations that kind of like us as funders who do things like this. But I guess if I were in the nonprofit's shoes, I would just say that it's all about how you tell the overall story, right? If you want the story to be that we are hyper efficient and 99 cents of every dollar you donate to us goes towards the program, that could be a very compelling hook. We've seen that work before. But I think there are a number of different storylines that I think have been emerging in the last 5-10 years, and I think deserve a lot more attention. To Denise's point, whether it's going closer to R&D, because yes, we need a lot more innovation in this space, and even going towards building a much more of sustainable and energizing organization that where the fuel is more than passion. I think that's crucially needed. So I would, as a funder, I'd be really keen to see things like that.
So Kate Seeley has offered that they're working on something called the fullcostproject.org, and it's actually in the chat window. And the initiative looks at culture change within organizations and within philanthropies to fund the full cost of outcomes, which is predicting or on knowing how to measure what achieving outcomes actually costs, and having an open conversation between nonprofit and funders what's needed to achieve outcomes. Wow, thank you. Well, that's coincidentally, Kate should have been on our panel apparently.
Yeah.
All right, so
great plug, Kate.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, I'm going to take one more question, but before we do, please at this moment go into the chat window and vote for which organization you'd like us to donate the proceeds from today's call for to. We have, I put it in there, 1 for Tipping Point, 2 for Code for America, and 3 for UNICEF. So just you can send it to me or send it to everyone, and I'll try to calculate. I'll try to do some quick math before the end of the next question. All right, so the question is actually really interesting. Claudia is asking, what best practices are there for companies to express or broadcast their social good goals within the company and to the world at large? Please give examples. So how do you actually, right? So we were talking about the bottom line, right? So this is what you brought up, Denise, is the bottom line, and how it's good for that. So part of it, I'm a brand guy, I'm a big communicator, and it's important. So we need to both tell that to the company inside to get everybody on board, but also to the world. What are some maybe 1 or 2 good examples you've seen that has worked? Good
one. I'd say the first rule is externally, you better not talk about it until you're doing it, because then it's going to be just seen as social impact washing. So again, I think when you get to the point where you have some initiatives under the belt, so to speak, and you're ready to talk about it externally, it's not touting it as, we do social impact, we're wonderful. It's that our mission of our organization is to do X, Y, Z, and here's how we've realized it through programs, and you tell specific anecdotes. Because you have to have the proof in the pudding, otherwise people will see right through that. I think internally, in my experience, it's been, bubbling up from this feeling of like, we want to do something, we want to be a little better at this, and so you start to lay out goals for yourself internally. Again, like this is a generative approach rather than a looking backwards, assessing what we did, we're wonderful approach. So internally, as you're building it, it's like, this year we want to aim for, our mantra is going to be like, at Frog, it was advancing the human experience. And so we could use that as our North Star to say what that's going to mean culturally is, our teams are going to look this way. And what it's going to look with our clients is that we're going to try to think about sustainability. And so you'd set it up as a goal and you could track that during the year and then report back on how you tried to meet that goal through different initiatives. So you tell the anecdotes about how we tried it out. So again, you're not like creating a campaign, you're not creating headlines, you're making something, as you said, Josh, you're trying things out and you're telling the story of what you learned and didn't learn from that and letting that be the story on its own, I think.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Please don't social impact wash anything. But I'd say maybe just, 2 things to add. One is there definitely needs to be a sense of consistency between what you say internally as well as what you say externally. So please tell one story as you do this work. The other one is, to your point, I do think, oh man, it's just so easy to use this as a catchy headline or as a catchy thing to make everything be okay. And that's just not going to be the case. People see through bullshit so quickly. So I think it's with anything you do, it just has to be an authentic storytelling type of mechanism, right? But even beyond just storytelling, but I just think what is even cooler is do the work, create some type of action or impact, right? And have others tell the story because it was so cool, right? It's such a better story when it comes from people you've worked with or people you've impacted. And you can just be a very small part of that story, but that by itself can resonate quite broadly. That's just a bit of my approach.
I agree. It's better to show up as a partner that has done some work in the space, and then you tell that story about like, what did we do? So for us, like we did some work with Point B, which is a education group in Myanmar. And it was a small program, but meaningful. And rather than like tout that as one of our big client stories at Frog, we let Point B tell the story to their UNICEF partners or to other education partners. And then it's, again, authentic. Then you're in like authentic collaborative partnership and you're talking about the work and the impact rather than saying like, we are a company that will do social impact. You're proving it through what you do at whatever scale you're at.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for an incredible hour. This was I think an amazing experience, and I'm really happy we were able to do it. So our votes are tallied. The votes are in, and it's La La Land. Oh no, wait, sorry, wrong announcement.
Moonlight.
Moonlight. Tipping Point is our winner. So we'll be donating money to Tipping Point. So Tipping Point, I just put the URL in the chat box here, but it's a really interesting, it's kind of like building the capacity conversation that we were just talking about. They screen nonprofits and rigorously define, fund, and partner with the most promising groups working to educate, employ, and house and support those in need. Thank you, everyone. This was really incredible. So I have been recording it, and I'm trying to figure out what we want to do with the recording. Amber just asked if it'll be available. Amber will hook you up, figure that out. But thank you to Denise and Dave so much, as well as my team that imagined this and created it, Victoria and Barry. Thank you everyone at CLLIVE. Please go to CLLIVEx.com if you have not been part of this conversation yet and would like to be. If you enjoyed the conversation today, we would absolutely love the social media bump at CLLIVEx. And I'm going to be sending out from Eventbrite a little thank you note to everyone who attended, and with a little survey attached so we can iterate and make this even better for next time. Thank you, Denise, and thank you, Dave, and we'll see everybody at the next CLLIVE event.
Thanks, Josh.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.